Many are, but most are not. And therefore, when you ask the what were they feeling, it was a long-term answer.
Yeah.
From the time things are happening, and the effect is only seen in 1963 of the choices you made in 1923 afterwards. Similarly, it's by that time, there's a new generation. So the choice didn't fall on my grandmother and grandmother, it fell on my father.
Yeah.
So in 1963, he's 57 or whatever, the 58, and he's making a choice. And he was guided by that very, very strong tie which had come from his father and mother, and which he himself had confirmed to himself. So he had no difficulty. But there were thousands of other Indians who did not have the internal commitment or the internal push, and did not have the external push of knowing about politics. And so you find a community which drifts. And you can see the same thing in the US, for example. The initial political power is among the British settlers. All of these, John Adams, George Washington, Jefferson, they're all Englishmen.
Yep.
They are born in America, and so they are saying, so they say, we rule ourselves. Later on, when the Irish immigrants came in, they were the navvies. They built canals, Erie Canal, and all these are the indentured white laborers from Europe. The Russian Jews, the German pastoralists, all these people, they also kept away from politics.
Yeah.
The first Irish family is John Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're Roman Catholics. Therefore, it took them a rich crook, Joseph Kennedy, who made his money in prohibition,
Yes.
Yes.
to be
Bootlegging.
to be able to buy into this.
Yeah.
So it's not a unusual thing. But again, if you were to ask an Irish immigrant who came in 1898, it would take him up to 1960, just as it did us 63, to explain to you why it took so long for an Irish family to at last win the presidency,
Yeah.
and so on. There's been no Jewish president just now at all. Same thing. So you get discrimination, you get the absence of participation in politics meaningfully, and so on. So all these things not only take time, but are intergenerational to work out.
Yeah.
And so that's it. And finally, sorry to put you, these are large numbers, meaning that the Indians in Trinidad, by 1964, when Jamaica and all these are, there's a large population of Indians. So in Guyana, the Indians were in a majority. In Fiji, they were initially in a majority. So the effect is not just of settlers. You're now talking of large groups of the population being present there. And so in this thing, the same thing happened in relation to the choice of labor. In a plantation, you need large numbers of labor at one fixed spot through the year till it's planted, grows up, the crop is to be harvested, blah, blah, blah. You can't have migrational labor there. You can't say, I will call people from uh, say one island, and then they plant and they go back, etc. etc. You can't do that. Similarly, for us here in Kenya, railway construction labor, the construction labor for the canals in Northeast America and all over England required thousands of people who were permanent, who moved as the canal dug forward. So as the railway moved from Mombasa, with the rails being laid up right up to Kisumu 5 years later, you needed thousands of people who could not say, I'm going home because I've got to plant the crops at home, or people are sick at home, etc., etc. So the labor was not recruited from the coast or from Lake Victoria side or from any part of Kenya. So about 32,000 Indians were brought in, not all together. They were brought in about 16,000 at a time, 8,000 at a time, like that, as the need one. And then when they were finished altogether, there had been 32,000. So that is how the indentured system works. Many of them stayed over, and then there were many traders who had come. Before any railway person came in 1896, on the coast and Zanzibar, particularly Zanzibar, there were already about 15,000 Indians. But they were not upcountry. They were Mombasa, Zanzibar, Bagamoyo, then later at Dar es Salaam. Dar es Salaam is a very recent town, 1885 or thereabout. Mombasa is 1,200 years old. So the place where they settled was where they were trade. So 1896 is the time when Kenya upcountry saw a settlement of Indians through the railway, and these were the two sources of the settlement. So what did they find? Our family, they found themselves reliant for food, religious practices, burial or cremation, for education. So the first primary schools are Kachi, they are Khalsa, they are Arya Samaj particularly. The government is not helping them. Then later comes a government Indian school, which became city primary and Jamhuri now, but much, much later. So for all this, the community looked inward and helped itself. All this is also reflected in Uganda. And we thought we were being discriminated against, which we were, and treated badly, but it created in us things which made it possible for being expelled from Uganda and still finding we landed on our feet in Britain or Scandinavia or wherever we went, because we had learned to look after ourselves. We had learned to know where to get our foodstuffs from. We knew how to practice our religion away from all the holy places. All the holy places are in Asia, in Iraq, in Iran, in India, Pakistan. But yet these people land in Britain, thousands of them. And within 10 years, their children are in universities, they're doing well in shops, but slowly. And if you look at them, they first did exactly what we did 100 years earlier, namely, they provided for their own poor people in London. They built their own madrasas and their Hindu classes. They provided for their own schooling of the religion for the children and all these, and did not take part in politics until the last 10, 20 years. Same pattern, same thing. It took a second generation to get a Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Wow.
Yes. All very, very riveting points. And I think it's also very important to mention the human cost that was borne by the Indians who came over as indentured servants. I think the statistics are staggering when you actually consider them. I read somewhere that for every mile of railway that was built between Mombasa and going up to Kisumu as it was then,
Yes.
4 Indians died for every mile of railway that was built. And that amounted to 38 Indian indentured workers a month who lost their lives.
Yes.
And you mentioned before, like this sort of the stratification of society that took part in its imperialist, colonialist society. These deaths of these workers, which were recorded as imports from the subcontinent, were tallied or were tabulated in numerical form. So they were not even given the dignity of having their names recorded for posterity, whereas obviously settler deaths were recorded by name. And the native population were not even afforded that, the dignity of having their names or their numbers written down. So I think it's important. It's something that also has to be written and noted for posterity, is that the human cost that these people suffered, the Indians suffered coming over, was very, very high. And large numbers of them, not only in the construction of the railway in Kenya, but in other outposts of the colonial limbs that stretched around the world. I think, for instance, like there was a ship that was headed to Fiji in 1884 or something that lost 56 workers. And 31%, I think, in 1 year that were headed to either Fiji or Mauritius perished. And these were just recorded as in numerical form as well. So
yes,
it's an important point to raise. A very large and heavy price was paid in terms of the loss of life.
Yeah, and I think just also to add, Pheroze, what I think I picked up from you is the fact that these communities were not always literate. So they also had no way of recording what was going on, and even recording these deaths themselves in a way that we can have a record of who these people were. So that's also an interesting angle for me around that self-sufficiency, but also how do you actually survive when you can't record yourself, how you can't record your experiences and share them even with your family back in India?
This is so important. The effect in history for decades for such people is called erasure. We are erased from history because of what you have said. And the erasure can be deliberate because you simply say to the DC or the collector, as the commissioners were known in India, send me all the details about how many planters, the white planters, have children for school and how many times they've gone to hospital, but nobody else's statistics. that is deliberate erasure because you're wiping out what is there. What you have said is what happens when the community is unable to make the record,
Yeah.
and therefore the erasure is taking place anyway,
Yeah.
even if it's not deliberate. And so in the process of recovery, we have to make an effort. And the Black writers in the US have been very clear. Somebody asked a Black writer in the US, why do your books only contain Black characters? And so he said, if we want to be remembered, we have to be in the literature of our country. And if we want to be in the literature of our country, we must write about Black people. And so we have forgotten in the 60s in the US, and here James Baldwin is our conscience.
Yeah.
This is the person who time and time again not only answers back white racism,
Yeah.
but he begins to tell all Black people everywhere, but particularly in the US, what are you doing about it? And so it's important that we begin to write these things, to put them down. Also, being ex-colonial people, we are monolingual. And so the bulk of our reading is English or French or Dutch or whatever the colonial power was. So the effect is that 99% of the books in English about Kenya are about erasure. And the rest, that when we are mentioned, we are all mentioned as subjects of ridicule or subjects of being despised, right? So we have to undo all that. And the task is not of satisfying a literary critic who says, oh, what a great book from this African writer from Kenya. You know, he even talks about Indians. Oh, my God. No, no. This author from Kenya must be clear that his readership is Kenyan, Indian, Black Africa, conscious India, so that we can actually get to some truth about what those people felt, what grandpa and grandma felt. So that is a very, very important thing. Secondly, as writers, we cannot be lazy.
Yeah.
I was very, very fortunate that the official letters from the railway to grandpa were somehow kept. There was no box or anything. They were kept in it's a habit of Indian jewelers. They keep valuable things wrapped up, folded in cloth. And there are many bundles kept.
Yeah.
So these papers, and my mother, whose cupboard was the one which kept the important folded things, one day gives this to me. And so I have some documents. The documents helped me to show to history, to colonialists, to people who are racists, that I can tell you 19th September 1900 is the date on which my grandfather started his work in the railway. And you were not there.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they are the pioneers for everything.
They discovered
They are the
everything.
pioneer. They discovered everything. You know, you come to Victoria Falls.
They discovered Victoria Falls.
I discovered
Mount Kenya.
and Mount Kenya.
Oh.
So I use that, and I use those documents to show the white settlers. So when Delamere came in 1902, and he came in 1897 on a hunting trip, and then in 1902 he comes and gets 100,000 acres just outside Nakuru, 1902. By that time, my family had been here. For years, we were going up and down the country, and many, many people were going. There were not only Indian people coming, people came from Nyasaland. People came, what we now, from Malawi now.
Yes.
There are many families at the coast, up country.
From Malawi,
who
yes.
Came. Yes, absolutely. And into Uganda.
Yeah.
And so people were moving around, but they're not pioneers.
No.
They are nobody. So I use the documents for that. But the documents can't tell us, does this man love the country? Why does he stay here? The questions you asked me.
Yeah.
And so we have to work to find that there is other material which we must dig for.
Yeah.
And get out to begin to work. And what the colonialists taught us was, these people came from India because they're poor. India is a poor country. They are full of disease and will die and famine and all that. And so he came here, and that's all there is to explain. All right? That's why they came, because inherently India can't rule itself. People came from Malawi, they were poor, they couldn't get anything to eat, so they came here, and they came to Uganda, and they stayed on. What's there to ask? What's there to ask is to say, exactly, Edge, is to say they have no feelings. They are not capable of looking at Mount Elgin and saying, that's a beautiful place I want to be near. Mount Kenya. No, only whites can come in and say, oh my goodness, this was something extraordinary.
Yeah.
All right. The Kikuyus have been saying it's something extraordinary for hundreds of years. But they are not, nobody went to. So we, Kikuyus, people who have walked in from Malawi or come by ship from India, we have to dig up that and begin to say, what is the evidence of his feeling? The evidence of his feeling was, I could have gone back and married. Lovely story. Muzaffar Khan is a Punjabi family. He was the KFA chairman at one time, Nakuru councillor. He's written the book From the Land of Pushtu to the Land of Ma. Because his grandfather, who'd come here, then they all walked from Mombasa towards the center, and then he went into the Rift Valley. And he was hunting he's a Pathan from North India. So he was living with the Maasai, and was friendly with the person who was important in that area, and was not a Libon, but an important person. So one time his grandfather said, I won't be here in the coming months. I'm going to back to India. So the old man said, "What for? Why are you going? What's aren't you been working here?" He said, "Yeah, I'm going to get married." So the old man looked at him and he said, "You don't like our daughters?" Is something wrong with them?
That you're having to travel so many kilometers to go back.
So absolutely. So Muzaffar's grandfather could only say, no, there's nothing wrong. So the old man shrugged, and Muzaffar's grandfather married a Maasai girl.
Wow.
Wow.
So later on, he also went to India and also married a Punjabi girl. But one of his aunts, not one, I mean several of the latter family are Maasai Punjabis.
Wow.
So where was that recorded? Nowhere.
Nowhere.
Till Muzaffar began writing 10 years ago. And that book you all must read. It's a rambling recollection of the family, etc.
Wow.
That hard work edge, all right, to say what kept him there, what pleased him there.
Yeah.
He was a free spirit in a free place. He looked around and there was no fence.
Wow.
No fence. And these colonialists who said, you can't do this, you can't do that, he said, okay, you keep your highlands. There's I'm off to a whole country which can do without you.
Yeah.
So in this, our writers have to cease to be pleasing the model of English writing that is recognized. Nothing wrong with that. But have you done your home work, the work of the home, which is to answer the questions? And that is why Song of Lavino hits us. Song of Lavino hits us because Okot is answering your question about his grandmother, Lavino, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we are not all that brilliant. We are not as brilliant as Okot.
Yeah.
But we have to try. We have to try to understand and give them a voice which they didn't have.
Yes.
That illiteracy which you pointed out, Edge, is kept them out. And our task, having these tools, is to sit down, look, imagine that, trace them. Where did they go? What did they do? Let me give you a major thing. In 1914, there's a First World War. The British declare war on Germany, then Germany declares also war on Russia. This is the First World War, and recruitment comes. Young men, because it was the army, infantry, and so on, people walked off their jobs, and families and just went into the army and fought in France and on the Eastern Front and etc., etc. And they are honored today because they represented bravery, patriotism, virility, the defense, all the factors. 1952 in Kenya, an emergency is declared. Young men walked off their jobs. Young men walked off their families. Young men walked off their rural homes and went into the forest. And when you read about them, they are terrorists, they're illiterates, they have no political thinking, they're atavistic, they take oaths. What do you think they took for king and country?
Exactly. Wow.
So that is what we want to ask. And now to talk, Peter, you are asking about the cost of the railway. The
Yes.
cost of the railway was of the 32,000 indentured workers who were brought to work physically on the railway. The death toll was 2,900, which is about 8%.
Yes.
8%, if there was anything here, would be, I mean, it's beyond, it's a massacre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, let me give you the next massacre in Kenya. In 1914, when the British fought against the Germans in Tanganyika, in German East Africa, the army did not have mechanized trolleys transport, but to have 30,000 troops, you have to have food, the backup ammunition, the tents, the water, the guns, and it all comes behind.
Yeah.
So as people die and the new people come in and every day's food and so on. Now, all that was done by the carrier corps. And the
Nobody
carrier
talks about it other than the name that we now have left over in an area of town.
Yes.
Correct. Here, Mombasa and Dar es Salaam.
Yeah.
And the death percentage there, the most conservative is that same 8%, 30 people dying every month, much more. And the real figure is much higher. It's much higher.
Wow.
And Gandhi's assistant, Reverend Andrews, who came here to check on the Indians' position, found this and wrote a damning article saying, look at the census figures of 1921 and compare them. There is actually a drop in the African population, 2.5%. Therefore,
wow,
our task is right in front of our eyes to begin to. So there are some materials, and an English historian called Hodges, Gavin Hodges, who was a school teacher here in Strathmore School, began writing about it, and it's out. But where is the writing by the families?
Yes.
Is there no Kamba? The main recruitment was Kamba and Luo, and a bit of Kikuyu from Nairobi. So where is that? I have personally bought medals off the pavement. The Maasai market, these people, they're selling those things. They are the medals of those people.
Wow.
So that is a what impacted the family, and the let me give you the I'll find it in,
Maybe as you're looking for what you're looking for, maybe I can attempt to pass a thread of commonality through some of the themes that you and Edge
yes,
have brought up.
yes,
As it pertains to specifically the importance of writing and recording our history for posterity, as well as
yes,
the role of women that you bring up in your book. So, for example, there was the role of the professional letter writer that was very important in
yes,
order to send letters home for those who wanted to keep their families abreast with what was happening in this new colony of British East Africa. And also the fact that as to do with the system of indentured servitude, it was open to a lot of abuse because of the very fact that our colonizers took advantage of the fact that the indentured laborers could not write and sign their own contracts. So a lot of them were done by
yes,
thumbprint. A lot of the laborers who were brought over on false pretenses, thinking that they were coming to do administrative jobs for the colonies and ending up in the sugarcane plantations and whatnot in the mines. But also something that that really stuck with me in the book and that you mentioned as you were answering Edge's question was your mother's role as the gatekeeper and the safeguarder of the family treasures, and the role that your grandmother played. Forgive me if I pronounce her name wrong. Is it Dinu? And
yes,
her role in the letter
Yeah.
that petitioned the king for
yes,
Pheroze's return to British East Africa, which your father Eruk wrote. And so, I think that ties a very important thread of commonality in terms of, one, the writing of our history for posterity, and two, something that is always frequently overlooked in this whole narrative is the role and the very important role of women, and especially the role that Indian women played. Like I said before, if it wasn't for the role that your grandmother, Dinu, played
yes,
in ensuring that she petitioned the king at the time for your grandfather Pheroze to be able to come back. And not just that, but the role that Indian women played in terms of safekeeping of the financial affairs of the family. I thought that was also very poignant. And the letter that your father wrote to the king, which enabled your grandfather to come back. So those themes are always very important and prevalent throughout, and they tend to be kind of swept aside, especially the role of women.
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, it is true. And remember that most poor families, in relation to the role of older people and of women, are very conservative and orthodox. So that the women were not looked for advice, but it was also understood that they could not be heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the men did nothing at home that contributed to the economic welfare, and their justification for being out of all this was, we bring in the money.
Yes.
And we are the traders, or we are the workers, etc., etc. Again, it is for us to construct that home to see how much was there. I find the role of grannies and aunties, which we were badly reminded of during the HIV crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who brought up all those orphans?
It's the grannies.
Grandmothers and aunties.
And aunties, yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we have to go back there. The you know what Chinua Achebe said? He said, you've got three roles to do. You've got to work your own, to look after to provide for yourself.
Yeah.
You've got to provide for the nation. What are you doing for the nation? And three, what are you doing for your talent?
Yes.
If you're a writer, you're a dancer, you're a singer, you can't neglect it because you're doing the other two. You can't neglect the other two, if you're doing the other one, wah, wah, wah. Now, in that talent, he placed a big role for what are the books that you're writing about for children.
Yeah.
And you will find the same emphasis laid in what Terry Hurst was doing throughout, in Joe magazine, in his cartoons, in his work, everything. That there was always a section of the creativity which was targeting the generation which would carry it on.
Yes.
Always. So you also need a section of the past. And if you read Things Fall Apart Again, and because we came to it very early on in school, etc., we think we finished with it. We read it, we know about it.
Yes.
You go back to that book. I had some reason to go back to that book about last year, and I was blown away. The man had created, the DC is there, but the older people are living not in colonial Nigeria, they're living in their own world.
Yeah.
He creates that world, and he creates the world they were living in before.
Yes.
And it's extraordinary how he does it without being a lecturer in anthropology.
Yeah.
Without being a patronizing neo English author. It's coming from his own questioning. How did they live? What did they feel like being uprooted like this?
Yeah.
Now, that's not an easy task. And to do it in that extraordinarily beautiful English, it is an achievement way ahead. So our task is to be writing those costs, writing about the women, writing about those grandmothers and aunts, and finding out why didn't the women say to the man who had come from Malawi, either he's married to a Buganda woman or Teso woman, or he's brought a wife back from Malawi. Why aren't the women saying to him, hey, I don't fancy this diasporan life, let's go back?
Yes.
They didn't.
Yeah.
More than that, they built a garden round. They planted roses, they planted vegetables, but they planted sufficiently good food on that table, tasty enough for not only the man, but the children to feel, my God, I've never had food like my mom made.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah.
They were there behind 100%. 100%. And they were changing the quality of that life. And you got to compare that with the miners who move from Mozambique and Swaziland to Johannesburg, who come alone, no families for 2 years. They've had relations with men there, but
Yeah.
they still are persons who can go back. But compare that with the life of a man who's come with his woman and they are together. So that is where the hard work comes in. It's this business of trying to write like the latest fiction book in the New York Review. That's not an ambition.
And that's an interesting point, Pheroze, because I think where we are at this juncture of history, and I think it's almost as if we are divided into two distinct camps almost. If you look at the generation today, they focus on digital media, which is basically worth 1 second. If you look at a tweet, the value of a tweet is about 30 seconds, and then another tweet, and then that information is actually lost. Facebook, I think, has a longer period of the value of the post, and maybe Instagram, and Instagram is more about pictures. So you have a generation that I sometimes feel almost as if they're really not interested in their past. And they're not interested, so they wouldn't be interested to hear what your great-grand-uncle was probably going through in order to even just understand the realities of what they're